The sun had barely crested that horizon when I received a knock at the cabin Dora Rare event given my secluded location. The air smelled like pine and dew, fresh and undisturbed, which made what I found on my porch all the more offensive. A printed flyer tucked in the crack of the doorframe, flapping in the breeze. It read, in bold red ink, Lakefront property for sale HOA zoned, exclusive access. It even included a map that clearly showed my private ranch lake right in the center, complete with directions to the supposed community dock. I blinked. Then I laughed. But it wasn't humor. It was disbelief. You see, my grandfather bought this ranch in 1957. It included 500 acres of pristine wilderness, a freshwater lake teeming with bass and trout, and land surveyed and recorded before most of the HOA board members were even born. The lake? Fully natural, spring-fed, and legally registered as part of my deed. It wasn't some shared recreational resource. It was mine. I immediately knew who was behind the flyer. Lorraine Delaney, known in the neighborhood as HOA Karen. She'd been trying to rope my property into Silver Ridge HOA jurisdiction for 2 years, despite being corrected repeatedly by the county. Her goal was simple: absorb my ranch into her petty empire of landscaping citations and mailbox color codes. Apparently, facts hadn't slowed her down. And now, she was publicly trying to sell access to my lake. I made a few calls. County zoning office? No such development permits had been filed. Real estate agencies? They were confused. Turns out, Karen had cobbled together an unofficial flyer and circulated it through the HOA newsletter and social media group. Several residents had already messaged her, expressing interest. One had even driven up my private road and tried to fish off my dock. That's when I knew it was time to stop playing nice. I pulled out the deed, the maps, the zoning reports, the water rights agreements, everything. I marched into the county clerk's office and filed a formal complaint for property misrepresentation. At the same time, I instructed my lawyer to draft a cease and desist addressed to both the HOA and Karen directly. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was launching an offensive. Karen, of course, didn't take it well. She called the sheriff's department and claimed I'd threatened HOA residents with firearms. Deputies showed up at my gate. I invited them in, showed them security footage, and offered them coffee. The footage not only cleared me, it also captured 2 separate incidents of HOA board members trespassing. The deputies took statements and promised follow-up. But I wasn't done. The next day, I met with a real estate agent privately. I had been eyeing a few empty parcels on the edge of the Silver Ridge development, particularly one plot Karen had inherited from her mother, but never fully transferred out of probate. It was technically available for purchase under the right offer. I made that offer quietly, through a trust. Within a week, I owned it. Karen didn't find out until a for sale sign was yanked and a new one put up, private no lake access. Her rage was immediate. She stormed onto the property screaming, phone in hand, trying to call the sheriff again. This time, they didn't come. Instead, I received a call from a deputy apologizing for the inconvenience, confirming my land ownership and advising me to install another gate. So I did, with concrete posts, steel fencing, and surveillance cameras. I blocked the only public trail that HOA residents had been using to sneak down toward the lake. My land, my rules. And now, Karen's so-called lakefront development was cut off literally. Residents began asking questions. Some realized they'd been misled. Others demanded refunds for HOA dues spent on the fraudulent project. Karen tried spinning the narrative, blaming rogue board members and claiming I was targeting her unfairly. But the paper trail emails, flyers, video made it clear.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
But the paper trail emails, flyers, video made it clear. But the next HOA meeting, which I attended as the owner of a lot within their boundary, I presented everything. My deed, the trespassing footage, the cease and desist, and the new ownership of Karen's inherited lot. I closed my presentation by announcing that, effective immediately, the HOA no longer had any access to my ranch lake, and any further intrusion would result in legal escalation. The room was dead silent. Karen stood up, trembling, and stormed out. But that silence didn't last long. In the following days, I received a wave of emails from frustrated residents, some furious with Karen, some curious about how I'd managed to outmaneuver the entire board. A few even asked for advice. Apparently, my resistance had sparked something unexpected. A quiet rebellion. So I began organizing. I hosted a landowner's coffee at my barn the following Saturday. 15 people showed up. We swapped stories, everything from unfair citations over flight poles to threats of forced landscaping changes. I shared what I had done, digging into public records, watching real estate moves, and fighting back legally. People took notes. They asked questions. And for the first time, I saw fear shift from our side to theirs. Karen caught wind of the meeting and attempted to shut it down with a noise complaint. The deputy showed up, saw families drinking coffee, and rolled his eyes. "Looks like a peaceful assembly," he told her. Not my jurisdiction. That night, I received an anonymous tip Karen was attempting to have my private road reclassified as a public easement. That would allow the HOA to open access from the back entrance, enabling lakegoers to cut through under a new claim of community right-of-way. I didn't waste time. I pulled every survey, every plat map, and had my attorney send a formal letter to the county engineer clarifying the road's original classification and its exclusion from any public registry. We filed an injunction, and just to be safe, I installed additional gates with biometric locks. Word spread like wildfire. By the end of the month, Karen's influence was crumbling. The community newsletter, once her propaganda rag now, featured anonymous op-eds demanding financial transparency. A Facebook group emerged, run by residents, called Take Back Silver Ridge. The tide had turned. But I knew I needed to secure the victory. I scheduled a community barbecue on my property, open to anyone not affiliated with the HOA board. Over 40 people came, including a local journalist who was writing an exposé on abusive HOA practices. The article ran the following week. Karen's face was on the cover. That's when the HOA board started to fracture. 3 members resigned. One publicly admitted he had no idea Karen had faked the lake access plan. Another board member tried to run for president against her but was blocked by a rule Karen had slipped in months earlier, requiring board approval for candidates. Residents were furious. Then came the audit. I tipped off a state compliance office to Karen's attempts to forge development documents. Within days, they requested a formal review of Silver Ridge's governing process. When Karen refused to cooperate, they issued a subpoena. Her facade of control began to crumble under pressure. The final nail in the coffin came when a local environmental group discovered Karen had been quietly approving unregulated runoff from HOA-sponsored lawn treatment companies directly into my lakes. Tributary. That opened a whole new can of legal worms. I invited the environmental group to survey the lake and publish their findings. They did, and their report was damning. The HOA's practices were not just petty, they were harmful. Public opinion flipped. Karen tried to deny it all at an emergency meeting, but even her remaining supporters started backing away. I used the moment to announce a new proposal: dissolve the HOA entirely. The idea sent shockwaves. But it found support among residents who were tired of Karen's tyranny and sick of the constant lawsuits, bad press, and declining property values. By spring, a vote was held, and the HOA was no more. Karen didn't stay quiet for long. Within days of the HOA vote dissolving her little empire, she was back to scheming. Only now she was more desperate and more reckless. The moment the decision to disband the HOA hit the local news, Karen filed a lawsuit against the entire neighborhood, claiming the vote was fraudulent. It was laughable. Her court filing was riddled with factual errors, and she didn't even have legal standing anymore. Still, it was enough to make some residents nervous. That's when I decided to step in Agenbut this time, with something bigger in mind. I wasn't just going to end Karen's reign. I was going to build something stronger in its place. While Karen focused on petty lawsuits, I worked behind the scenes. Using my now well-known influence in the area, I began collaborating with county officials and local developers to establish a new neighborhood charter, one rooted in transparency, voluntary cooperation, and most importantly, exclusion of abusive datrenar, HOA oversight. I didn't want to create another HOA. I wanted to build a community coalition that protected landowners, not punished them. Meanwhile, Karen's legal antics kept getting worse. She began showing up uninvited to people's homes, handing out flyers about her lawsuit and trying to rally supporters. One neighbor, an elderly widow, called the sheriff after Karen pounded on her door for 10 minutes straight. That complaint led to a temporary restraining order against Karen. Still, she pressed on. I decided it was time to reveal my next move. At a public meeting in the old HOA clubhouse now owned by a private investor who let us use it, announced my new non-profit initiative, Ranchland Preservation Coalition. Its mission? To protect landowner rights, expose HOA corruption, and educate residents on property law. Within a week, out of the 60 families joined. Karen tried to smear the coalition online, claiming it was a cult. But every time she posted, someone countered with links to official documents, video clips from meetings, or county records. Her credibility crumbled in real time. Still, she wasn't done. 2 weeks later, my assistant, yes, I had to hire one, by then brought me an envelope that had been slid under her office door. It was an anonymous packet filled with emails and printouts that linked Karen to a shell company she had secretly used to move HOA funds around. Turns out, she'd diverted nearly $90,000 into a consulting firm based out of her cousin's garage. I turned the packet over to the county prosecutor. Within 3 days, Karen's home was raided. News vans were parked outside, and footage of investigators carrying boxes of files from her garage made the evening news. Charges of fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction followed. She was arrested, posted bail, and then promptly fled to Florida only to be picked up again in a hotel near Tampa 3 days later. With Karen gone and facing trial, the neighborhood entered a strange calm. The old HOA signs were taken down. The ridiculous, approved shrubbery list was shredded. People painted their homes the colors they liked. Fences went up. Dogs barked freely. Freedom returned. But I wasn't done yet. I bought 2 more lots that had been bank-owned, cleaned them up, and offered them to the community for use as a shared garden and events field free of charge. Kids rode bikes across them, old-timers played checkers under the gazebo, and for the first time in years, people actually waved when they passed each other. Then the state invited me to speak. Apparently, our neighborhood had become a model for post-that-way transition. I gave a short speech at the state landowners conference, and by the time I left, 3 other towns had reached out asking how they could follow our lead. Karen's trial was public and brutal. Testimonies from residents she bullied, fake invoices, backroom deals it, all came out.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Invoices, backroom deals it, all came out. In the end, she was sentenced to 4 years of probation, fined over $200,000, and banned from participating in any homeowners' organizations. Justice had arrived. But even with Karen gone, the fallout continued. Former board members faced scrutiny for approving Karen's decisions without proper oversight. Some claimed ignorance, others turned on her outright. The State Compliance Office issued new guidelines for HOA transparency statewide. Our coalition gained even more traction. We started publishing a newsletter, holding monthly town hall-style gatherings and offering free legal consults through a retired attorney who'd joined our cause. We even established a landowner hotline for reporting abuse. One of the proudest moments came when we successfully lobbied to block a county proposal that would have allowed new HOAs to form without resident approval. Our voices mattered now. Meanwhile, Karen's Florida arrest unearthed new evidence. She had been funneling money through multiple fronts, not just the shell company. There were links to a landscaper who'd never done any actual work, and a law firm that existed only on paper. The prosecutor reopened the case. A grand jury indicted her on 5 new counts. This time, her bail was denied. That's when I knew this saga was finally nearing its end. And in its place, something better was blooming. The coalition grew stronger. We established committees focused on wildlife preservation, fire prevention, and sustainable construction. Younger residents volunteered to map out trail networks that respected protected zones, while older members donated equipment for community maintenance projects. We even hired a part-time coordinator paid from donations to oversee events and logistics. We turned the old clubhouse into a community resource center, complete with a lending library of tools, DIY guides, and historical maps of the area. Locals could host yoga classes in the mornings and movie nights under the stars. My ranch barn became a hub of weekend activity from chili cook-offs to wildfire preparedness seminars. A journalist from a national magazine visited, intrigued by the story of a neighborhood that defied HOA tyranny. Her article went viral, titled, "The Ranch That Beat the HOA." Donations poured in. So did inquiries from communities nationwide. Karen's second trial ended in a guilty plea bargain. She was fined again, this time with the stipulation that she publicly apologize in a letter circulated to all Silver Ridge residents. She didn't write it herself, of course it was court-dictated, but it was printed in full and read aloud at the next community meeting. People clapped. With Karen finally out of the picture, we held a celebration. Not to gloat, but to honor what we had reclaimed. Control of our homes, our land, our lives. By year's end, crime was down. Property values stabilized. And more importantly, trust returned. Neighbors helped neighbors, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And that, I realized, was the truest mark of success. We continued expanding. The coalition began hosting annual festivals that drew visitors from other county celebrations of independence from oppressive governance. We developed educational outreach for nearby communities still trapped in HOA systems, sharing legal templates, hosting webinars, and empowering others. Our small town was no longer just a footnote in a fight against a rogue HOA president. It had become a blueprint for liberty-minded community development. One evening, while sitting beside the lake watching kids skip rocks and older couples stroll the trail around the shoreline, I realized the battle had never just been about Karen. It had been about principle. About standing firm when it's easier to fold. About using the law not to harm but to protect. And as I walked back up to the cabin that evening, a fresh wind rolled off the water. A peaceful silence settled in. That's when I knew they'd never try to take it again.